So first and foremost, I'm very happy that today we have this opportunity to discuss about the topics which are in matter for us in a food industry, especially. And we will talk today about sustainability, waste management, and also social responsibility practices in a focus group for a food safety management system. So the overall webinar will take around 2.5 hours. And eventually, in the middle of the webinar, we will have a short break for all of us. So, and just from beginning, some introductional aspect from my side. So we will have 5 different segments within this webinar. As a lecturer, I will try to tackle each of them in a manner of connection between each of the topic, starting with the introduction of sustainability itself in a food safety management systems. Then we will move to the environmental impact and waste generation in a food industry operations and connected chains in a food industry. Then we will tackle the climate change topic, moving with the sustainability and social practices within the already present food safety certification standards and auditing process. And on the finished touches, we will discuss some of the typical areas of concerns which arises in a relation to this particular topic itself. So from my side, I'm Valdas Lukagalis, and I'm having the 12 years of experience within the food industry. So from my academical background, I'm having bachelor degree in raw food material and quality and safety, veterinary food safety master degree, and currently the PhD candidate for agronomy and food science. And from the work experience, I worked in different food manufacturing companies, as well as in a certification business as an auditor. So from my professional background, I'm auditing core GFSI schemes such as FSSC 22000, IFS, BRC, Global Gap, RSPO, and others. So even though that would be a short introduction from my side, and to continue with the introduction from the BM certification side, I will introduce my colleague Alvis to make some quick words.
Good morning, everybody. So, as Valdis introduced me, my name is Alvis Vitos, head of food certification department. I have approximately 10 years experience in food production. Previously, I managed certifications for certification for one of the biggest food production company in Baltic. So, few words about BM certification. So, the company is established in 2006. So, company is have 20 years experience with 11 offices all around the world, including Europe, Asia, and beyond. So, company does the certification in many fields like ISSC, SURE FSC, PFC, forestry supply, sustainability, and carbon calculations, and also all the management systems as in general like ISO 9001, 14001, 27000, and others. Why companies choose to work with us? So we have a large background. We have a lot of auditors that are specialists in their own field with a lot of experience in their fields. We also specialize in industry solutions like construction product certifications, like CE marking, and also in the food safety certification. We are accreditation holder for FSSC 2022. Uh, I'm also a scheme manager for this scheme, and we also uh, offer BRC and IFS certification for food production companies. And yeah, so why global companies choose to work with us? As I already mentioned, we have uh, more than 20-year experience in this field. We know the local regulations, and we are trusted partner all over the world, like mostly in America, Asia, and Europe.
Okay, thanks, Alvis, and I will take it from here. So, continuing with today's topic. So, when I prepared the materials, I tried to look to the topic based from a food expertise and from a food producer's point of view, and also from a food supply chain point of view. So, either way, the core principle from where we should start is 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. I believe majority of you are already aware about these. So, just as a reminder, in 2015, United Nations Development Program, or UNDP, created and generated these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which having the core principle to increase the economic growth while at the same time tackling climate change aspect and working to preserve oceans and forests. Of course, these SDGs includes several different topics and subjects. For example, like no hunger sustainability development goal or others in relations. So today, throughout the whole presentation, what I would like to also highlight, I will try to connect SDGs with ESGs, and I will explain that later as well with the FSMS, meaning with the food safety management system as well. So we will have three huge columns of different goals, let's say, and approaches and aims within the sustainability, and we will try to tackle all of them and to see how it connects to the sustainability, how it connects to the climate change or waste management or waste reduction itself. So I hope that by the end of this webinar, you will leave with more knowledge than you arrived. Eventually, what is the agenda itself of the SDGs? We have a strict goals, meaning that the agenda is till 2030. So already since 2015, nearly the 15 years will be passed by reaching 2030. And that's a good question if all, let's say, personnel working within the food industries are well aware about the SDGs. Sometimes maybe it's not always the case. So this webinar will help you also to introduce yourself to these SDGs as well. So, how to map the SDGs and ESGs? So eventually, from ESG point of view, we have different spheres. So we have environmental aspect as a core principle. I hope you can see my laser pointer as well in here. Then they have the social aspect, so the S of the SSG, and then they have the governance, or in other wording, the management itself. So all of these three spheres are interconnecting with the SDGs. So around these bubbles here, you can see all 17 mapped SDGs as a different goals and of activities. And for example, if we're talking about environmental sphere, we are thinking about the climate action SDG, we are thinking about the clean water and sanitation itself, and of course, clean energy, renewable energy in that point. And then they going to the social aspect. We are thinking about how we can eliminate or reach the zero hunger issue across the globe, how the quality of education affects the process, how the good health and well-being addressed in here, and how sustainable cities and communities can be developed in there. So in this part, we can already sense from a social aspect the food safety and quality culture topic as well. And I will address this topic even later. how it connects to the SDGs and ESGs. And on the right side, as I previously mentioned, the managemental point, the governance point, so how we can regulate and control to reach these SDGs within 2030, as only less than 4 years are left in there. So we have industry innovation process, so partnerships, peace, justice, for example, and these interconnections between the governance sphere and the social sphere, including the intermediate areas. So, like one of the SDG to reduce inequality, to also apply the gender equality rules and a decent work and economic growth itself. So even though there's a lot of things to discuss and a lot of things to tackle in here, as there are 17 SDGs and 3 ASGs, we still should look at everything as a connecting bubble itself and as it's intervening each other. So, but as per today, even though the topic is very large, I will focus mainly on a food safety and a food safety management system in here. So keep that in mind that I will not talk about everything as it will take one day to discuss all the sustainability matters across all different industries. So the focal part in here is a food safety management system. And in here, starting with the introductions part, so meaning how we can move and transit everything what was discussed in here, going to the FSMS of your company, so Food Safety Management System manuals or your certification process itself. One of the core rules within the sustainability guidelines from United Nations is also that today's food production shouldn't be compromised by the processes which we try to imply in regards to the sustainability topic. So, the food industry rests on three interconnected pillars. We can see these are in here as well. So we have environmental topic, we have social pillar, and we have economic pillar. So how we can connect these pillars to the food safety itself. So from environmental point of view, we tend to look only usually on the production side. But what SDGs explains that we should also look at the whole chain. So meaning from where materials come, how these will be delivered and to whom it will be delivered. So also including the retailers, not only the manufacturers and producers. Then we having the social pillar, so meaning who is working with the produce, how it is handled. So the social pillar is fully connected, I would say, with the food safety and quality culture topic, which is also not new topic for us, but we still need to remind each other about this. An economic factor. So once again, that the production processes and the sustainability development within the facility shouldn't interfere with the safety, but it should also increase the economic aspect. One of the key takeaway in here as well, one of the sentence which I will mention several times in different slides within our webinar, is that there are roughly 1/3 of all food which is produced is lost or wasted, not only within the site production area, but also within the whole chain. So 1/3 means nearly more than 30% of the produce is somewhere lost within the chain due to the improper handling. So that is one of the topic which is also addressed already in FSSC 22000 standard. So in a current applicable version 6 of a standard, which was issued already a couple years ago, this scheme specifically dedicated time and specific clauses to the sustainability, not only to the sustainability topic as its own, but also to the precise requirements in regards to the waste management and a food loss. So, which is why the FSSC made the first steps to improve the sustainability topic within the producers. Of course, we can argue here because there are other GFSI schemes like BRCGS, IFS, Global Gap. I will discuss about these later on as well. But if we are discussing directly about the implementation factor, I would say that FSCC made the highest approach to this matter. So who drives this aspect of sustainability? So of course, as producers and quality managers and everyone who is working in the food industry have a very strict regulations. And we will talk about this as well during today, especially about the news and the recyclability of packaging materials, for example. So regulations by EU or by the country-wise applicability, we are having some approach to the sustainability within the food industries, which we must to apply. There is no other way around. Like we need to imply something. Then we have consumer expectations. Of course, it's very depending by the by the production site or by the company, but consumers, especially from the private label sectors, are requesting to declare the company's measures and aims towards the sustainability, towards specific schemes even. So it will not disappear. Consumers and customers and retailers are usually raising this bar, and that is a good approach because once again we have ESG commitments as well in regards to the SDGs too. So once again, waste reduction and resource savings must never compromise food safety. So I need to address this several times during this webinar. So we have this introductional part of the three different pillars of the sustainability topic within food. So how we can integrate it within the current applicable systems in our production or in the companies. So first and foremost, sustainability works best as it is integrated into already working system. So of course, the easiest way to do it may be to make a separate procedure, separate policy, separate instructions, but at the end, it creates a lot of documentation noise. In which in a longer term can be forgotten or can be misled in some way. So maybe one approach would be to already, if you're not having any particular approach as per now to the sustainability topics, to start to include them in your current FSMS or in your current food safety management system. Like if you have specific manual HASP plan, HASP risk assessments, procedures, you can already try to tackle these topics of sustainability based on SDGs and ESGs directly. So what existing structures could be affected? For example, policy. So your food safety policy or the company's policy, which is the core document of the manufacturer, should include already sustainability topic. As per now, all GFSI standards present in, let's say, mostly used in Europe, are already requesting that policy would have one or other way of approach, like some kind of sentence, some kind of aim about the sustainability or waste management. So just a core example, as per current requirements, FSSC bluntly states that your company should have a waste management policy. So it's directly connected to the management of sustainability within the company as well. Meanwhile, IFS food standards also states and says that within food safety policy, there should be a statement about the sustainability. So standards are already aligned with this kind of approach. What we could do better is to have measurable objectives. So I see in many times that companies are implementing some kind of documental approach to the requirement or just making some statement about sustainability or waste management, that the issue appears when you try to measure it, how it's happening within the site in a different area of time. So as all food safety aims and goals, the same applies to the sustainability. The goals and aims should be measurable and should be assessed within the year. So meaning that maybe we have some kind of example like production site says what we are trying to achieve less than 2% of wasted goods within our production facility. That could be one of the example, of course, but it's very defining and depending by the site's activities, what we actually doing. And the third part in which it could be implemented and it should be implemented, it is a management review. As you all aware, management review process is also the core fundamental process of the facilities, which connects senior management and middle management as well as the white and blue collars. So meaning that this management review should focus also how the sustainability process of development within the facility is going. What are the stages? What kind of measurable objectives we as a company set? So this could be the finite overview of the sustainability activities within the site. And in this case, when we integrating within our own present procedures and manuals, we could look at sustainability in four different topics. Of course, it's only the example in here. There could be way more topics. As we've seen, there were 17 SDGs, so you can create even more. But from my side, not to disturb the timing of a webinar, I'm just highlighting the four of them. So one could be food loss and food waste. There's difference between these two terminologies, and I will explain that a bit later. So we, as a site, could measure the baseline of a waste. So what is the current waste production of food waste within our manufacturing activities? We can, in that case, when we know what we usually waste, we can then set some kind of reduction targets. Of course, no one thinks that you will reach zero waste policy in within the year, but it could be like some kind of plan within the 5 years to reduce your waste accumulation within the production based on a specific targets. So just to see how you're actively working towards it. And also redistribute the surplus products safely. By the surplus, it's meaning everything what you produced, but eventually cannot sell, meaning, for example, some kind of non-standard product, which is still safe to consume, but it's not quality-wise the same aspect what it was as discussed and agreed with the customer. So we are talking about here charities, wasted products of animal, uh, and so on. Then we have the pillar of resource and resource efficiency. So we can think about how we optimize the use of water. Of course, it's depending by the country because the source of water it's very different in different countries as well. So this should be in mind how much of the water supply we have. Do we have potable water or we have potable water which is also recycled within the within your facility? So it's the manner to discuss internally. Then we have energy itself, like solar panels, for example, if you implemented these on your facility, and cleaning without compromising hygiene in here. So why it's important about this topic, not compromising the hygiene during the cleaning? Because, there was one of the aspect of SDGs about the clean water and sanitation. So it doesn't says that you now need to stop use the water for cleaning. No, it just meaning that you need to use the water in accounted manner. So understanding how much of water is used, how much of water is drawn to the drains, and is that water is still good of use, or it is like having some chemical materials remaining from it, disinfectants. But yeah, this is the topic we will tackle later on as well. Then we're having the packaging, which is also one of the fundamental aspects within the sustainability in the food systems nowadays. So there is a questions about how we could reduce the packaging materials used to pack the food good, how much of recyclability of a material can be achieved within your packaging material. So primary, secondary packaging are in here as well intact, and how we can still protect product integrity. So even though for some of the packaging materials, it could be the case with the trimming, the thickness of a packaging material, which can also compromise the safety of a product. So it's very huge discussion between the quality and the persons who are managing environmental aspects. So that discussion should be always be in coherence together with different departments if you have different departments. If you are a small scale business and these kind of topics of of quality and environmental aspects and sustainability aspects are under your own role, yes, then you need to discuss with your senior management how these processes could be tackled. So these four of different aspects includes also responsible sourcing. So in here, eventually we will discuss about WASP, meaning the vulnerability assessments, and especially the chains and the strengths of the chains during the current status of a global scale. And these four pillars aligning also with one of the SDG for zero hunger, so it's connecting to the waste, and also SDG 12 for responsible consumption and production, so meaning responsible sourcing and resource efficiency, including the packaging. So now we go in deeper to this webinar topics, and we will discuss about environmental impact, especially on waste generation within the food industry. So starting with the different types of where this waste can appear. So we have organic waste. So let's say some kind of plant-based materials, trim-offs. We have then packaging materials, wastewater, and also emissions, which are produced during the production stages. And these four are the main waste streams, at least which we can handle and tackle now. Of course, you can also discuss that there are even more within the production, and that would be right. But for a matter of this discussion, I would say that firstly, we can handle all of organic waste as a one segment just to make the easier process of this discussion. So, the scale of a problem makes reducing food waste one of the most effective climate actions available. So, which is why I've already mentioned what waste control and waste management should be part of your policy or could be part of a separate procedure, how you handle your waste and if you understand how much of waste are generated within your production facilities or within the chain somewhere. So, once again, one third of all food produced globally is lost or wasted. Once again, the same sentence which I mentioned previously, so you can imagine in your heads, but above 30% of all produced products are waste. The product which is good to consume, it's safe to consume, but it's wasted somewhere. Then the food industry itself provides, or let's say releases, up to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions from these connections to the waste. And on annual basis, the number of waste materials are increasing significantly. So by UNEP Food Waste Index, as per now, we have roughly 1 billion tons per year of food waste, which is having a good, safe food to consume, but is not used and removed somewhere within the chain. So moving forwards, as I mentioned, I currently discuss mainly the processing step in which the waste arises, but the chain of waste is truly a long one. And here we can see all the steps in there the waste alongside appears. So, and the greater the embedded water, energy, and emissions footprint of the food thrown away within the chain. So, starting with the first segment, the farming. So you can imagine some of plantation, agribusiness plantation, and here the primary waste materials, which are also calculated to this one third of the waste, is also harvest losses, so unfit to use produce. For example, apple, which was just, let's say, it's a good to safe to consume, beautiful apple, which had struck or bruise on the side, and which is why the retailer is not accepting this as it is a poor quality, or it's accepting this as a very low quality. Yeah. So it's still safe to consume, but it's wasted alongside the process. Or we can have crop residues. So also regarding to the climate change, which we will discuss, we can have waste materials originating from here itself. So as an imaginary case, let's imagine that here we have some kind of carrots at the beginning stage, yeah? So due to the farming activities, let's say from 1 hectare, we have some amount of carrots and some of these have been wasted away due to not correct nutrition values or not correct uh, quality-wise product. So we have some percentage of waste in here. Then these carrots go into the processing stage. So if these have not been cleaned, meaning that processing or manufacturer will maybe trim the upper part of the carrot, yeah, the leaves, let's say, or the green parts of the carrot, then maybe it will be peeled off, so additional waste appears. And again, during that process, some uh, additional source of the waste appears. And then we're going further. So processing, during the processing, maybe these carrots will be used, I don't know, sold as a fresh, cleaned, ready to use carrot bagged, or it can be used in a, I don't know, like carrot cake, for example. So it will be processed in here, which eventually will create some waste. Then we go into the distribution process. So within the distribution, let's say it's easy, then we're having ambient stable products, yeah? It's easier to control, it's easier to handle. But if we have cold chain in here, so temperatures of refrigeration, let's say 6 till 10 plus centigrade degree, yeah. So in here, we need to secure the cold chain because if we're having failures in a cold chain situation, we can also have the whole batch of product to be lost or part of a product to be lost, depending on a scenario and case. But yeah, it usually can appear due to the spoilage in a transmit. So if the vehicle is not properly clean, if the vehicle having pests, dust, molds, yeah, depending by the situation. And I'm not only talking about the road trucks, we can talk about the sea routes as well as the shipment containers, yeah, or the air route products which are transported via the planes. So we have different sorts of potential waste accumulation within here, and as well as the most typical damages which are appear within distribution is damaged packaging material. So ambient products are also not safe from this part because products can be damaged, some kind of corner of a pallet or the whole pallet just slipped away during the transportation and whole produce is just now everywhere within the vehicle. So which is creating additional source of waste in here. So, and then we're going to the retail process. And in retail, in the supermarkets, in shops, we can have the usual type of waste by the unsold products, expired stock, cosmetic deviations. So again, visual differences between the product, or just overstocking, meaning that the retailer just ordered too much of a product and it is not well produced, not well sold. In that case, once again, we have waste in here too. And the final part is the plate waste, the final consumer. So the customer who bought the product from the retailer, from the market, just think in your own mind how much of food waste you generate throughout the week, how much of food you are wasting, which was not consumed by you, even though you buy it. Maybe some products haven't even been opened and it's already expired. So that's also the handle from a consumer point of view. So awareness question is also the topic in here, how we can make this awareness even more imprinted to the consumers, what responsible buying should be present as well, not to waste the materials. Also, some of the confusions arises confusion over the date labels, expire dates, and best before dates. As you all are aware, there's difference between these ones. Sometimes I even heard that there's a situation when consumers are not recognizing the best before date marking between different countries. Yeah, because some countries are printing on a label manufacturing date and not the best before date. And that can make a confusion. Customer can think that, okay, I bought the product which is already expired and I'm throwing away. So in that case, as I mentioned, the example of carrots and, for example, carrot cake. So you can imagine if already we had waste of carrots in a farming, then in processing, then in a cold chain distribution of carrot cakes in a refrigeration area. Then some of the cake have not been sold in the retailers or it was just too much of it. And eventually, from a consumer point of view, consumer bought the whole cake, but he ate only half of it and another part was thrown away. So you can imagine what actually one from our exemplary case of 1 hectare of a produce, or let's say 100 kilo bag of the carrots, we used only small portion which was actually consumed. And that is the highest, let's say, aspect within the food system, within the sustainability, how we can even control the whole chain and how we can even understand. So the first point for the manufacturers would be, okay, firstly, to understand the sourcing, to understand the chain, not only focus on the processing in your site. So the mind should be exploding a bit broader in a way to understand the chain, where the raw materials goes from and where our final products goes to. Yeah. So, discussing further, as for the global data itself, the majority of this food waste as a contributor appears in households. So, meaning that final customers or consumers are throwing away the majority of the food. Of course, this data is also can be discussed further, but it is just for exemplary case in here. Then we have food services, so you can think about the restaurants, cafeteria, canteen areas, yeah, in which cases some of the food is also thrown away if it was not eaten at all. Of course, in here we have a good practice, like persons who are going to the restaurants are usually taking away to home that food which was not eaten. And we have retail, so 12% within the retail. In here, I have not added plant farms and not added processing because it will be discussed a bit later. But this is the part which is the hugest to understand for us. But within the chain, the consumption is also a huge waste accumulation starting in here as well. So, as I mentioned, most of the food does not only happen waste within the factories, it also happens after food reaches the market and after it reaches the customer. So waste at the consumer stage carry out the largest footprint and all upstream inputs are already spent. So what we should do as a food businesses, as manufacturers point of view, so there could be portion control. So it's not mandatory, it's not a requirement, but it's a topic of discussion how it could be tackled. So some kind of portion control. If we're seeing that the majority of product is wasted, demand forecasting, which is crucial one, just to understand truly how much of product is needed. So proper planning on both sides, from a retailer and from the food manufacturer, and safe donation programs. So meaning, are we donating some unused, unpurchased product to the charities? Are we allowing to, let's say, sell it at reduced price in some countries? Or we are allowing to use it by our own employees if it's still safe to consume once again? So we should find the sources of waste within our chains and try to cut it, or at least be aware about it and try to amend it. So, and now we will discuss the connections between the typical sources of a waste and how the environment is connected. This is also the simplistic approach. There could be even more topics and more rows within this table, but here, what could be the dominant factors? So from organic food waste. So it's not like, again, terminology here. I'm not talking about bio or the eco certification. In here, it's like organic waste. There's organic and non-organic. So non-organic would be stones, for example, and organic would be everything else what we can consume. So, for example, plants, animal-based products, yeah, and the mixture of it. So in other words, a food waste. So the typical source of it would be different types of trimmings or peelings, spoilage, unsalt stock and plate waste, so everything what we already discussed in the previous slide, and it is then connected to the environmental impact. So starting from the farmers, so we have methane from landfill, nothing new for us. I believe everyone knows this aspect of methane. Then we have wasted water, land, and energy, so some of the resources which was not properly used within the process. Then we have additional stream of packaging. So the source can be different types of packaging materials within the industry. So if you are quality manager in a food site, a production site, you can look at your facility and try to grasp what type of packaging material is the most wasted within your facility. Is it plastics? Is it cardboards? Some kind of papers, multi-layer materials? Uh, for example, LDPE or HDPL. So it's depending by the situation. And what does it causes within the chain itself? If we compare the whole chain from the start to the end, it's the litter itself. And then we have the microplastics. So you also, I believe, know from all the social information gathered that we have the microplastic crisis across the globe. And also the high recycling burden. So later on, we will discuss about the supply chains of packaging material, and we have EU regulation, which I will tackle today as well, which in our case, as per now, it's like a burden for us to understand the recyclability itself, but also the portion of how much of material can be recycled. So, and then we have a wastewater stream, and this is also important for us as in the food industry, especially if we having wet cleaning processes or wet washing processes. So we having different sorts of cleaning, different sorts of chemicals in used, either alkaline-based, acid-based chemicals, or the mixtures of it. And we also, for example, here we have cooling water or technical water within the facility. So what is the environmental factor in there is then you drain everything what was used to make a wet cleaning process. uh, the nutrients can come in the water, meaning the proteins from the lines. Yeah. So if you had some production, I don't know, of poultry products or fish or production of doughs, for example, you have a protein-rich mass of waste, which is also potentially drained to the drains, and they have chemical loads on the waterways. Eventually, that water, if not cleaned or not processed well, can goes to the main waterways, which is again going back to the cycle. Yep. And then we having the fourth in here waste stream. As I mentioned, there could be even more. We have energy and emissions. And in here we have refrigeration process. If we have cold chain activities, we have heating and transportation, and how it is affecting the environmental impact. So CO2 emissions, once again, we have different sorts of refrigerant gases and freezing solvents. For example, it could be ammonia, it could be freon, yeah, and other types of aerosols. And these are driving directly the climate change. So as you can see, why waste is important and why standards are already trying to approach the companies with some kind of measures for waste control needs to be done, especially because these are leading directly to the environmental factors in here. So, and now we will go to the connections to the climate change. So food systems and climate are locked in a two-way relationships, as you can see in here. So we have producing and processing. It's two different terminologies. So producing could be also meaning the growing. We having the agricultural business. Yeah. So we having the growth of plants so and vegetables and fruits. Then we having the processing and then distribution. And all of this is also generates a roughly one third of global greenhouse gas emissions. So previously I talked about one third globally accumulated waste of food. And here we have similarly one third of greenhouse gas emissions, because as mentioned previously, we like it or we don't like it, waste streams are also connecting to the environmental impact. And what do we have in here? So the food systems and your production facilities, and by the food systems, it means the whole chain, not only the manufacturer, but again, all five pillars that we discussed, affecting the greenhouse gas emissions, thus making the change within the climate. And then, as a comeback, as a gift, what we get the heat, droughts, floods, and emerging new hazards also in a food safety. So this is a very vicious cycle, I would say. And this comes to the manner that a warning planet reshapes what we can grow and how safely. So, once again, reminding what we can grow and how safely. This will be very important because later on I will discuss about cacao, and this already seems practical, or we can see the result of not properly made sustainability within the chains of food, and which is why the climate is giving back us the result of it. Uh, and these greenhouse gas emissions, which we causing as a food industry, again, I'm talking here about only the food industry because greenhouse gas emissions has a lot of different industries as well, but it eventually disturbs the harvest, supply chains, and food safety as well. So from a greenhouse gas emissions, the indication here is huge as well, as you can see. So the majority in the percentage wise of the greenhouse gas emissions are accumulated within the agriculture and land use sector, meaning that we are having the plantations which are growing plants, fruits, vegetables, or we have particular farming activities, so with the livestock, cows, for example, beef, sheep, yeah. And again, going back to the previous table, we have seen already the methane as a greenhouse gas emission factor. So this is rather very huge percentage. And of course, if we look bluntly uh, at this graph, we would say that okay, waste disposal, packaging, and other aspects are not so severe here. But if we accumulate all of these, we have also very high amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a waste disposal, which is creating these kind of gases. We have packaging, so meaning recyclability of a packaging materials, and improper use of the packaging materials, how these packaging materials deteriorates within the flow of the chain. Then we have transportation, so within the distribution chains, which part of distribution we use, either it's road, sea, or air, is having different factors of emission. Then we have processing itself, so in production, how the processing can affect the greenhouse emissions of gases. And then we have retail and consumption. Once again, unused product, which is getting spoiled, which is releasing some things as well as the greenhouse gas emissions. So the accumulation of it also raises the emissions, and we can see the severity in the different sectors itself. So, and now within this webinar, we're going further to the standard approach. And if we are discussing about the first aspect, about the first point within the chain, which is the agriculture, the first standard which should pop in our mind is global gap. And we have now already a couple of years back issued IFA version 6 standard, which is meaning integrated farm assurance. So this is part of a GFSI approved scheme. So if you never knew about this, just a reminder in here that companies or farmers which are growing their produce, meaning different vegetables and fruits, they are also can be certified by the GFSI approved scheme. So, and as you can imagine, Global Gap is fully emerged and fully focused on technically all of sustainability topics because the issue in the agricultural business is very huge in here. And then we have this Global Gap certification system. You can also understand why specific retailers and private label goods sellers are wanting that these farm growers would have this particular certificate. So this IFA Smart Standard version 6, what it built to the farmers, it was a stronger focus on the environment. So if by other schemes like FSSC, IFS, and BRC, we have particular clause of the requirement, global gap is going even deeper because each clause of a standard is having major must, minor must, and recommendation criteria. And this is not a nonconformity. It's like the clause is having specific level of risk, specific severity of this topic. So, and in that case, it's even easier for farmer to understand, okay, which clauses are fundamental for our farm to make it sustainable, to make it less waste within the whole growing system. And how it is tackled, we're having new criteria for the ecosystems, so different species of plants, of fruits, and also wildlife which is around of your plantations, and the reduction of greenhouse gases. There's a direct, straightforward clauses to this: food waste, plastic, and even deforestation. And Global Gap itself is making this continuous improvement plan, so it's also annual based audit, which is focusing on these particular requirements. And if, of course, there's a lot of different topics in there, but if we are focusing on a global gap, different segments, as per today, there's also specific clauses which are referring to the emissions and energy, so meaning about the growing process, what materials we use, is it greenhouse or open field growing aspect, how we can calculate the carbon footprint, and can we track it, can we check the progress of it, and if we can reach and if we shall be able to reach carbon neutrality within the farm. Then we have waste and plastics. So even though it's a first stage of the food growth produce, we having need to prevent any kind of pollution. You know, pollution can happen even from incomplete or incorrect waste and incorrect water supply, so irrigation process control. We have reducibility of a plastic within the fresh produce, and also how all the waste is collected and disposed or returned to the land. And then they have food waste and land aspects. So what kind of biodiversity protection acts you have on your farm, and how we're reaching the natural ecosystems within your growing site. So as a global gap standard, it's focusing directly on these manners. So going back a bit more to the climate topic, how it affects not only the growers, but the producer, distributor, retailer, and the end consumer. There are four core factors. There could be even more, but these are, I would say, the core ones. So firstly, due to the multiple fronts at once from a climate change topic, we're having different sorts and different scales of yields. We have safety issues, water provision issues, and logistics issues. So climate can be in here affected by the heat and drought. So in our case, we having the not expected yields of our produce. Then from the food safety hazards, we have, if we have a very warm climate or going to the warm and wet climate region, we can get a new pathogens. For the cereals, we can have a high amount of mycotoxins, for example, fusarium from the grains, yeah, or we can have new sorts of pests or accumulation or infestation of pests which have never happened within the particular crops. Then we have supply and distribution. So if we have some weather factor like storms, heavy rains, so it can affect the chain itself and the transportation of goods. So it's easier again if you have ambient stable product, but if it's cold chain product and you cannot supply your or distribute your product due to some kind of emergency, again it's minus for you as a profitability point of view. And then they having water stress, which is also emerging issue, as water, potable water, drinkable water are becoming as a scarcity within the whole chain, and the quality which is a sad factor. The quality of water, potable water, becomes less reliable. So we are not sure in all cases if the water and quality of water sustain at the same level, which is why it's also important to test the water, especially if your water supplier is not providing needed evaluations of the quality of the water you're getting. And especially if you're using that water to clean your product or to use as a part of a product. But that's a different topic in here. So, and here will be the case point, as I mentioned about the cacao. I believe you already heard about this in the social media or you have been already affected by it. But in the past 2 years, since 2024, we had a huge challenge in the food industry of the cacao beans, especially as the chocolate is used well within whole businesses, and as a humans, we love chocolate. So one of the core issues in here that the cacao beans comes from two core countries. So it's Ivory Coast and Ghana, and both of these are fully affected by the West African weather. And this weather is changing quite drastically. We have different temperatures now in the region. We have different seasons of rains and inconsistency of the amount of precipitation and of the rain. So witches kind of make the extreme heat and extreme harvest conditions, and the yields are of the cacao pods are decreasing. So even though it's like still profitability economical aspect, the issue here with a warmer climate, with more wet, humid climate, what appears a new type of food safety issues. So in the pictures, you can see two emerging issues. They were always present with the cacao business, but it was like the recent bloom of these. One, it was a black pod disease. As you can see, this cacao pod cannot be used at all, as it's changed the color and it's changed its insides itself in the whole scale. And then we have a swollen shoot virus, so meaning that the stem is affected. So this is like a blockage, and nutrients cannot be fully perceived, which is why the yield or the harvest is not reached at all. So, and this is kind of effectively now rising as an issue. So, which is why suitable growing land for cacao is also projected to shrink due to these changes of temperatures, and the shrinkage will be quite severe. So, it is now already expected that by 2050, the suitable cacao land will rise up to minus 50%. So what does it mean for us? Less available cacao as a raw material for our goods, and also skyrocketing prices of this raw material. Yeah, and this is only one example. There's a similar example with pistachios and different products. So you can see already that we have this kind of approach and result of a climate change within the market itself. So, what we can do or how we can adjust ourselves within this new emerging situation within the industry. So, we should think about building a particular supply resilient chain for climate. So, and it could include, it's on the example in here, you have different approach. There's like four different steps. Firstly, we could measure, then reduce what we measured, diversify if needed, and adapt. So this is why the adaptation is the most important factor, because nobody's saying that now we will not be able to produce chocolate. We just need to adapt or what we will find as a substitute within the produce. So, for the measure, firstly, we should map out the carbon and water footprint, what we're making in the food itself, in the food chain in different segments, not only the producers, but again, it applies to the growers, it applies to the distribution, to the retailers. So firstly, we should measure our footprint itself of a process, what we do. Then we have the actual values or understanding of our effective, how much we are affecting the footprint and how much we are leaving. We can then set the target to reduce by some level. So if we are just making the reduction aspect as a just from a thin air, some kind of value, it's irrelevant. So you need firstly to measure to know how much you can reduce or how could you potentially reduce which type of sources. Is it energy, waste, or emissions, or switch between all of these? Then we have diversification. So maybe we should think about different types of suppliers. As you already know, GFSI standards requires to have alternative supplier lists, so some kind of emergency control for supply chains. So it's nothing new for us, but it's part of the climate resilience controls. And if potentially possible, build a buffer stock against the shock if it's possible. For some materials, it's not even possible to build the buffer. Sometimes it's possible if it's like packaging materials or some particular long shelf life produce, then yes, you can build the stock if you have where to store these kind of materials. And then to adapt. So adaptation, maybe to invest in specific crops, maybe to have a partnerships directly with the farmers, to have direct control and supply of particular materials, and also to safeguard the cold chain process of distribution. So that could be the part as well. Okay, so now as 1 hour passed, let's make a short break of let's say 7 minutes. So we will come back, yeah, 10 minutes past 11. And meanwhile, while we're doing this, I will bring on the slide the feedback. In here, you can just write as a participants, if you will scan the QR code, you will be able to leave a feedback of what kind of trainings you would like to see in the future, and some of the responses would be requested. So let's say 10 minutes after 11, we are going back and discussing further. So before the break, we discussed how we should align our awareness and how we should align the resilience toward the climate change and what kind of structures we can do. So measure, reduce, diversify, and adapt. And here we can go now to the standard approach point of view. So what does the GFSI standard says on this manner? So luckily, a couple months ago, so on 1st of May, FSSC 22000 has released version 7 of the standard. So companies will be audited by the standards from the next year, 1st of May, so 2027, 1st of May, not now directly. But a part of all different changes between the ISO 22000 standards, benchmarking regulations, different categories of food alignment, one of the core fundamental principle of the alignment within the FSC version 7 was also to improve the strength of requirements to support organization to the contributions of meeting SGS or Sustainable Development Goals. So once again, we're going backwards to the same topic which we discussed at the beginning of the webinar, that the implementation of SDGs are becoming more important within the food safety. Of course, it was always important, but here we have even the now alignments within the standard requirements. In some cases, these alignments are not too severe. As I mentioned, version 6 already had sustainability aspects within the standard. It was also, as auditors, we asked already companies about the climate change topics. We asked and discussed about the waste management policy, but now the standard itself is referencing more of the sustainable development goals, and I will explain how on these. So, but in our core sectors, there are 4 segments. So waste management. So in here, we're talking about the additional requirements of FSSC version 7. So it turns the sustainability and responsibility from a good practice, so what was previously good to have, nice to have, now it turns to the audited requirements. So it's like it's already present within the requirement clauses. So for waste management, again, it is a reminder that food safety policy must have food loss and waste targets measured targets, which would be aligned with the FSMS objectives and also within the management review, as I mentioned. So this is also aligned in here. Plus, there should be a clear process of safe food donations. So charities, surplus food, rework activities are now strengthened within the new version of the standard. Yeah, and then they go into the sustainability part. So in that case, there is the packaging and environmental sector. So in one part, there are requirements about the packaging that cut food losses. So we are discussing about different sorts of packaging materials which are used within the food processing manner. And then they having the monitoring on environmental aspects. So in this case, within FSSC, it still remains within the site facility, meaning monitoring of environment. So air, water, steam if you have, ice if you have any kind of gases, how you control, how you see any spoilage microorganisms within the environmental air. But for more details, please open the standard and read exact requirements in there. But the subject in regards to the sustainability is present in there. Then we have social responsibility, and the focus here will be also on a food safety and quality culture. If you're not aware, GFSI also released a couple months ago new guidelines on the food safety and quality culture. So it's going to the maturity level, and the same is expected from the FSCC version 7. So meaning when the culture aspect appeared within the GFSI schemes in 2018, and it was like we are trying to implement the system, we're trying to develop system. Now we are changing and going further to the aspects of maturity. We are assessing how mature our implemented food safety quality culture is. Is it only the documental aspect, or it is truly controlled document controlled aspect and a process within the facility? So that is also the change in a quality culture aspect. And here we can also see some terms and also some alignments within the feedback of the employees and engagement. As you know, feedback and engagement is a different topics in here from what you can get from the employees as a response. And this should be tackled too. And then we have the fourth segment within the sustainability of version 7 is food safety and integrity. And in here, we are mainly focusing on three different classes, which is still food defense, food fraud, and allergen control. Why it is needed? So especially for a food fraud and threats, because as the climate is changing, we're having different supply chains or possibility to have different supply chains. It is expected that some raw materials could have even stronger relations to the fraud, or it could start to get fraudulent activities. How it could be addressed even. Again, if we're going back to this cacao pods aspect, what we discussed before the break, I mentioned that there are only two core countries which are producing the majority of the cacao beans. Of course, these not only the two, but these are the major ones. And you can expect that the pricing of cacao is increasing because the demand is still high, but the supply is very low. So if by some chance you're seeing that the cacao supply pricing is remaining still the same or it's reducing the pricing, that should cause you the alert, but okay, is it truly right? Are we having some kind of fraud in here? Why the price is lower than the typical market pricing if we're having such a situation within the market itself? So in this case, such a topics cannot be assessed only by the quality personnel working. It should be assessed fully and understood fully by the procurement department, by the persons who buying the raw materials and knowing the suppliers and the suppliers which are approved by the systems. So that should be also in the back of our minds in here too. So what we can also hear discussing here as well. So for the food loss and food waste, please, as I mentioned previously, this is the time when we have a separation between the terminology of food loss and food waste. So one of them is occurs and then reaches the consumer. The food is reaches the consumer or somewhere in between the chain, and the food waste, which is like food fit for consumption but consciously discarded or removed. So, from a policy point of view of the waste removal, it's like an audited obligation now. So, part of the audit is to have reduction policy with the aims, as I mentioned, with the specific targets, which should be not from a thin air. It should be calculated, measure. Once again, we saw these four parts in which we discussed how it should be. We should measure firstly, then go to reduction. So we firstly need to understand what we're trying to reduce. Then the safe donations and food loss. So it should be written somewhere in which sources you are donating or giving away food, which are you producing. Either you are totally, some of part of it, you are doing it or giving it away for your staff and employees, or either it's going to the charities or to other companies, but it needs to be disclosed like as a particular source of roots where it goes. And if we are still ensuring that that product is safe. And then byproduct reuse or the rework activities, surplus product activities, how these are routed, especially if we have animal waste products, so non for human consumption. So how these are rerouted and controlled, of course, by the different countries. We have specific regulations how this type of waste material should be discarded. And safety first. So your process which you are applying needs to be legislation-based compliance. So if legislation will say that you need to reduce your packaging open air by 50%, I will explain that later, by EU requirement, it means that it needs to be implemented within your procedures as well. And any kind of controls should never be at the expense of the food safety. It's the third or fourth time I'm saying this, but it's also important. So, which is why the communication between different departments, if you are the part of a larger organization, between the different departments should be made. Quality, sustainability, environmental specialists, and other operation-related personnel should be aware about these activities. What these shouldn't be at the expense of the food safety itself. So, and as I briefly mentioned about the implementation and maturity of a food safety and quality culture, it's also now a more dedicated within the FSSC version 7. We have senior management responsibility, so meaning that senior management also must actively build and measure it across the whole organization, meaning about food safety and quality culture plan. So the activities within the plan should be measurable as well. It should be traced, it should be assessed. Sometimes within the practice, I'm seeing that the food safety and quality culture is like a documented procedure, but it doesn't have any activities, any whatsoever plans to improve it somehow significantly. So again, this is the question of maturity. And it's now focused on communication. So how particular changes within the policy, within the food waste management will be communicated within the site, what kind of trainings companies will have about the whole topic itself, how we are having communication and feedback recollection forms from the employees. So, as I mentioned, feedback, it could be the aspect of food safety related issues within the facility. Meanwhile, engagement in here is we're having specific approach how employees are reacting to the case or how employees are acting against the culture and with culture. One example how it could be assessed during, let's say, your typical internal audits. If you see that in the production, let's say, there is a puddle of water standing within the facility and nobody cleans that, and you ask why it is not cleaned as per now, For example, employee would say, I have a cleaning scheduled next week. So technically, by the instructions, employee is right, but also it shows that engagement of person to do something extra is nearly zero. So that is the topic as well, how employees working on site are engaged not only to work in their specific part, but see overview of a workstation to see if there's any appearing issues which must be communicated. There are different things how it can be done. There's the 5S, 6S, different lean methods to control this point of view. So it's depending very based on a factual approach. And then they have performance and measure. So definitive activities should be tracked, and all of the system needs to be backed by the senior management. What does it mean? So during the discussion, if we are already seeing that senior management is not fully aware about the culture or speaking some things about the culture, how the senior management understands, but it's totally different from the plans and activities, it's already identification that the food safety and quality culture is not yet mature. So it's one part of a sustainability. Then we're going further for the sustainable packaging, environmental monitoring, and equipment requirements. I will not go too much of the details in here. It's just a bit of alignments within the current version and new version of the standard. So for the sustainable packaging materials, there is a questions about the food loss from the cuts of the packed materials. If we are improving the packaging material by increasing amount of recyclable materials within the packaging, we also need to assess that this change will not affect the food safety. So that would be the point. Then from environmental monitoring systems, we should understand the trends, what's happening within the facility, review if there's any annual changes within the trending, and also to assess how the effective the system within your whole lines are in case of a changeover process. But these particular requirements are more or less environmental based plus packaging based. And here we're going to one of the topic which is alerting or we need to be aware of. It's also in part with your current FSMS or food safety manuals. We have EU PPWR regulation or EU 2025/40, which is already from next month, 12th of August, implements a new approach on the packaging materials. So first, not to go too much of the details, but as per now, the recyclability is a very important. Now we have specific targeted percentage which needs to be reached in packaging materials for food. So recyclability needs to reach 70% from now as per this year, but in less than 4 years by 2030, the recyclability of the materials needs to be up to 80%. And also from 2030, we will have the approach of a right size product, so with no unnecessary empty spaces. I will explain how it looks and how it could affect the business. So, what does it says for us? So, for this EU regulation, we need to act now. So, there is no time to wait. We have very strict schedules in here in EU. So, firstly, the design. So we are already now talking about the design stage. So even the new product developers should be aware about this, that the packaging material should be designed in a such way that if you call it like recyclable material, it needs to have at least 70% of recyclable materials inside. And this percentage will rise up to 30% by 2030. So what does it mean? It means that alignment between the packaging material suppliers and buyers of these, so food industry, need to be aligned to understand what does it need, so what these requirements are truly stating. What does it mean for food safety quality managers? Don't forget to include this requirement, this legislation between your actual legislation logbook or Excel sheets, which you are collecting all of the legal requirements. So also by 2030, as I said, there should be the cut-off void space within the secondary packaging materials of sales. So maximum 50% of empty boxes would be allowed. And the proper labeling when we like to enable the customer to recycle the packaging material. So it would need to have clear sorting guidance, use of reusable or refillable formats if it's possible. So in here, we're talking not only about the food processors, we are talking about, let's say, retail or restaurants. Yeah. So we're talking about the reusability of the materials and refillable materials, if that's would be the case, some kind of glasses or some kind of trays. So it's also affecting this part too. So what could be the examples? I put it only here just from what I could found, definitely just to explain it a bit better. So it would affect some kind of retail-ready display cases, some cartons, dye packs, multi-packs, shrink-wrapped trays, promotional seasonal gift boxes, and, for example, tea and coffee capsules. So what we can see in here, what the EU is telling us about here, when we having this kind of box of, let's see, soda or some kind of beverage which is packed in a dye pack in here. So we have some empty space like in here. So what does it mean? That when the box is fully closed, there shouldn't be more than 50% of empty space in here of a product. In here, it means, okay, plus minus seems correct. Here we have the box of 3 ales. So if it's a can, okay, let's say if it's 3 different cans, we can see that technically this box is having around 50 or even more empty space in here. So that would be the question. If it's a glass bottles, okay, maybe it's different then, but yeah, that's the question over here. Then we have the gift box sets for retails, yeah? And in here, it's a very obvious case. So we have a gift box which having some kind of candies, egg chocolate candies. And in here, the calculation would be as so, but okay, we have a pure product here, 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 here. And if we calculate the mass, netto mass of that product in comparison with the open void or just void in the packaging material or part of the goods, we have questionable amount of the 50%, yeah. And in here we have this kind of capsules. I believe you're using it, some of you, like Nespresso or Dolce Gusto, yeah, like different types of caps in here. So we also could have some empty spaces around. So this is what the EU requirement could affect eventually. So that's the topic for you also to read. Firstly, the regulation, so to understand what regulation states, not to misinterpret it, and how it would be applied to your own sector. Either you're a producer, either you are a retailer. So it's very definitive for you also. Yes, and when we're going to the linking point of different standards and versions from the GFSI point of view, so I've already briefly touched global gap itself as a standard, as a core principles, and I talked about FSSC 22000, but there are voluntary extras, so or additional standards, substandards, somebody says, which are now becoming to this kind of change. Previously, it was voluntary. Now, somehow, customers and some of the retailers are requesting to have these as to ensure that producer of food is having approach to the sustainability in regards to the food safety. So each of the core GFSI schemes within the Europe are having these. So from FSSC, we having FSSC 24,000. It is fully talking about the social responsibility manners. Then from BRCGS, we have ethical trade standard. So again, social responsibility, worker welfare, site ethics. I will discuss about this a bit later as well. Then we have IFS, and IFS is having the majority of the different modules. It has even 4 different modules, which tackles each of the sustainability aspect. So it tackles supply chain, ESG's compliance, what we discussed before, carbon footprint and deforestation. And then for global gap, we're having the GRASP module, which is also referring to the social responsibility manners. What does it mean for us? It means that the tools are in there. So we're having all possibilities to make typical approach for our facilities, how we would like to make it to be compliant to the sustainability goals, to be compliant with the customer requirements and customer aims, defining, and it could be implemented as a combination of your core food certification plus some voluntary modules. So, and now I will discuss briefly about each of them for you to get a better understanding. So one of the thing what I will also want to highlight, that each of a voluntary module is free of charge. So you can go to the site of a certification system like to FSSC, IFS, or BRC and find these modules, these documents for free. What does it mean? You do not need to pay for anyone. You can download these and just implement the systems if you are not aiming to have certificate or have some compliance document if it's not requested by customer. You can do it by yourself as well, just to strengthen your sustainability approach of the facility. So starting with FSCC 24,000, so it's not 22, it's 24 in here. It was issued already in 2022. So as I mentioned previously, FSCC was way ahead with these topics. And so it's also globally recognized. It's a also certification-based system. So it helps the consumers to also address the sustainability matters of the social practices. So how you can imagine, I believe some of you know about the SMETA audits, for example. So it is like different scheme. And in here, I will not talk about the SMETA. In here, I'm talking about the FSSC and other food-related schemes because today is the core aspect of the food safety and how food processors and chains can implement. So FSCC 24,000, it's also tackling the global related human rights problems and it strives to make harmonization between the food safety and social responsibility. So we're having legal aspects in there as a discussion. Then we're having BRCGS Ethical Trade Standard, version 2.1 already, also way ahead of time. And in here, we also discussing more or less social aspect plus supply chains and responsibilities over the sources. In here, we have ethical trade commitment. We have responsibilities for sourcing of raw materials and certified sites, covering labor standards. So, as you know, each country technically is having their own label requirements or commitments, a part of EU regulation, but standard is trying to standardize, harmonize this process and requirements. And for example, the key requirements, so what I could mention you in here as per now, as a short guideline, it would be senior management commitment, again, how the management tackles this issue, what kind of evidence of leadership we have, how we make ethical trade system and policies, how we make the procedures in there, and what kind of labor standards we have inside as well in the facilities for fair treatment, non-discrimination, and protection of workers' right. So that would be the aspect and how the audit is gone for from the BFCGS point of view. We have blended audits. So it involves a remote desktop review of the documentation parts and on-site unannounced audit, which is needed just to understand if everything what is written within the documents is truly applicable based on the daily activities of the site. And annual audits are done as well to have the certificate of this particular standard too. And why it's different from FSSC, let's say 24,000, BRC Ethical Trade Standard is also aligned with other international standards like Ethical Trading Initiative and ILO conventions and UN guiding principles. So if FSSC 24,000 is focused on ISO requirements, for example, ISO 14,000, so in here BRCGS is focusing on ISOs plus ethical trading and UN guidelines principles as well. So, and recognized certification also improves market access and enhances the brand reputation by demonstrating that ethical trade practices and principles are fully integrated within the management system of a producer. Then we're going to the IFS as itself. As I mentioned previously, IFS is having the majority of a different segregated modules to tackle the whole sustainability topics. Again, you can reach these documents free of charge. You can check these without any audits. You can implement the requirements in there. There are a lot of good practices on particular cases which can be addressed within the sites. Even though IFS supply chain is a rather new standard, new approach, new module. It was issued in February 2025. It's the first version, but it's work as a part of a instructional guideline plus checklist, which you as a site can do to understand your level of preparation. And it evaluates the effectiveness of a processes for analyzing commodity related risks, so meaning raw material related risk in supply chains, identifying and monitoring supply chain disruptions. So if you have some of the materials which was not able to procure or some stoppages appear, any kind of updated online challenges which are happening, and especially fraudulent activities. Why it is a good tool in here as well, if you know IFS is having trend analysis, which are shared to the subscribers, I believe, each second month, and it explains what is actually happening in the market right as per now. So meaning that IFS process check is having like this live approach to assess the supply chain. So it can truly help not only the quality managers, it can help especially the supply chain procurement departments or the people who are purchasing the goods, how to address particular risks and what could be done to support the quality department. And also, this process is increasing transparency, of course, and also you can show for your partners what you're doing the right stuff in there. Then we're having IFS ESG compliance check. So once again, if we go into the beginning of this webinar, I discussed and showed you the SDGs and ESGs map. So the ESG compliance check is doing especially that. It is checking how your systems, not only food safety management system, but the principles within the whole organization is implemented for these compliances of ESGs. So the check is also stating as it is like in-house checklist can be done. Of course, if you want a certification, it's like the independent auditor will do this. But this version of the module is pretty new. It was issued in May 2025, so past 1 year gap. But eventually, site can be assessed on their sustainability policy, supply chain management, and this kind of check is carefully evaluates site processes to recognize vulnerabilities. So we're trying to check within your site, within your alignment of ESG, is there any things what have been missed or is potentially vulnerable? And also, this particular ESG compliance checks is helping to develop comprehensive risk mitigation plan. As part of a check will not only address risk, but also strengthen site's overall supply chain strategy. So in here, we can look that this tool can also enhance and support your VASP, or meaning vulnerability assessment part of you as well, just to understand what kind of vulnerabilities actually happens, not only from a raw material point of view, but also from a supply chain point of view. And the combination of this module is done by the pre-assessment part, mitigation plan, on-site and remote check by the auditor. So the similar as it's done by the FSSC, BRC and IFS. The same approach, still it's audited module. And also the third module from IFS is IFS Carbon Footprint module, and it is fully committed and fully reflecting the greenhouse gas emissions. I already mentioned within the start of the webinar why it is important to tackle and just to trace the greenhouse gas emissions. And This particular module was also issued the last year, May 2025. It's part of the ESG check. So meaning that if, for example, you are auditing your site within the ESG compliance checks, you also can have an additional module during the audit for IFS carbon footprint to evaluate your carbon emissions and footprint. And this is also annual assessment. So in here, and then one of the last from IFS modules point of view, we have IFS deforestation check. So this particular module was also issued in 2025 on September, so not even 1 year passed. And it's focusing directly on the European Union EUDR deforestation regulation, 2023/1115. So the company which is trying to assess and doing this in-house check for the Deforestation Act, it implements, the checklist is implemented and defined for relevant due diligence of a process to manage this deforestation specified risks in a supply chain. Once again, different module, but it's also discussing and assessing the risks within the supply chain. And in here, why it is different module? Because the requirements in the IFS deforestation check is fully reflected with the EU regulation, and also it involves tracing the origin of the materials and specific commodities, and also it's assessing and submitting the due diligence statements to the EU Traces platform. So whoever who are you of you working with this, you are already way ahead of the industry. Yes, and from Global Gap, as I previously mentioned about the IFA or Integrated Farm Assurance System, there is also the GRASP module, which is assessing the social responsibility part. This particular module cannot be done separately if you are not having Global Gap IFA certificate, so it must be in combination, or maybe you are a retailer and you have a Global Gap chain of custody, that's fine. But eventually, if you are IFA, let's say certified company, then you can have also the GRASP assessment. And usually this is also the module which is requested by some of the retailers, by some of the customers, which want to already see that, okay, the farmer is fully certified by Global Gap IFA, but still for the social responsibility aspect, it's good to have this extra module to complete the whole audit and have the whole site view about the farmer or grower towards this current trends on sustainability and food safety as well. So this voluntary module have a specific questions in regards to the social responsibility, to the workforce itself, and raises the questions of how it is controlled. Of course, there are another different subjects. I'm not talking about all of them, but some of them which I need to mention to you. So there's also Rainforest Alliance, RSPO, LSCA, and EPD aspects of verifications. And these are more connected to the specific commodities or specific raw materials if we are talking about the Rainforest Alliance and RSPO. So these are voluntary schemes, but of course, if for a final product, your customer or your own brand wants to have sustainability, if your own brand product wants to have Rainforest Alliance logo on a product, or there's needs to be a declaration of sustainable farming, there's also this logo which comes in contact with a product, and this is for cacao, coffee, tea, and it's important for the forest and biodiversity. Then we have RSPO for sustainable palm oil. So even though we're having always the discussion about the palm oil usage within the products, if you're using it and some of the customers wants to show the sustainability part of it, and deforestation part of it, RSPO logo is used. Of course, on a product, it's a bit different logo than in here. This is only the exemplary case for the trademark. But yeah, it's also like a voluntary scheme, which is done for as palm oil, and it's also addressing the topics about the worker and community rights, traceability, supply. Of course, here in Europe, we are talking about chain of custody of sustainable palm oil, but don't forget that same as in Global Gap, we have COC, and here in RSPO, we have COC. Of course, there are plants or mills which are having the core issues and core risks within the sustainability, which is why these schemes particularly are addressing these aspects. Then we also have life cycle assessments. So it's like principles in which we are cradle and assessing the carbon, water, and energy as aspects in reference to the ISO standards. This is also the service which is provided by BM certification. And we also have EPD or environmental product declarations, which is verifying impact reports of a product and building a specific source of LCA data based also on ISO standard requirements. So this is also a part of all of the GFSIs, what we have about from the food safety point of view, from the additional modules point of view, we also have additional schemes for voluntary specified commodities, like I mentioned, cacao, coffee, or the palm oil as well. Yes, and now when we go into the last segment of this webinar, about the typical areas of concerns or what will happen or what is currently may happen during the supply chains itself, uh, why this sustainability control is needed, and there it could be lacking or gapping or having some issues. So first and foremost is labor and human rights. So we're talking about excessive hours, pay below the minimum wage, and forced or child labor risk in the chain. So even though we are thinking that, okay, maybe in our country, for example, it may not happen, but eventually you never know. We have migrations, we have different approaches. So everyone who is working in the food industry needs to have the same human rights and the same labor rights. So that is one topic and area of concern where some issues can be present, which is why we have so many different modules provided by GFSI as well. Then we have health and safety topic. So missing PPEs or personal protective items or equipment as well. Unguarded machinery, blocked exits, for example, for the emergency exits, I mean. Incomplete risk assessments. So risk assessments would be only the documentation wise based, but not the actual ones which should be tested, which is why some requirements from specific GFSI standards says that emergency cases needs to be tested. Mock-up of an emergency operations needs to be tested, like ISO 22000 is explaining this one. Then we having documentation and traceability. So areas could appear in regard to these clauses if we have incomplete records. We have some gaps of suppliers' due diligence, meaning some not approved suppliers are present within the chain, not verified suppliers, or unverifiable claims. For example, you purchasing the cacao, which is Rainforest Alliance certified, but you're seeing that there is no active certificate present. It's a fraudulent activity and it's happening. Fraudulent certification is also appears within the global WISE community. Then we have responsible sourcing where the concerns can appear if we have unmapped supply chains. So the mapping in here is important as by the sustainability topic, especially for the companies which have not yet worked very strongly on this topic, you should map not only your production, but to understand the chains from where your materials coming, from which kind of origins it coming, to which flows your product goes to which retailers. So you should have some kind of even visual you can have just to understand if all of the service providers, if all of your chains are connected in there. And especially this is important when we having high risk raw materials sourcing, especially the ones who are highly fraudulent. So again, for example, it could be cacao, it could be some kind of olive oil, honey, which is also uh, fraudulent in many cases. So if there is a no risk assessment, it's causing the concern in here too. Then another segment would be environmental management. So we talked a lot about waste and water control. So it could be also a potential source of issues if we do not have any monitoring for emissions, for our footprint, if we are kind of exposed to the deforestation issues if we are not asking our suppliers of the cacao or the, let's say, palm oil if the supply chain is strong and acts upon the deforestation aspect. So could be the measure of concern as well. And then one of the last group would be this governance and grievance, so meaning the management and issues within the management. So if that case, if communication, as I mentioned previously, in a food safety and quality culture, if communication is not working properly within the different segments of the organization, there could be the case that there is a no worker's voice represented or taught. There's a weak grievance channels, so communication channels are not working. Many times I'm hearing, but in a small enterprises, but okay, there's only 10 persons working in here, so everyone is discussing the situation only vocally if it's needed. But what is the case if the person is shy and not want to address this? How we tackle, how we train the person to not be shy, to express the situation, express vulnerabilities, what he or she sees within the facilities and within the chain. And also the policies which are written but not applied on the ground. So again, if your employees are not understanding the food safety policy or what does this document even mean, it's already the huge issue within the food safety and quality culture. Sometimes the policies can be overwhelming. These can be very large documents. It shouldn't be. It should be easy to understand with targets, as I mentioned. So it should be very clearly understood by each level of facility and not even the production. It's also affecting the procurement department, it affecting distribution departments, and it's depending also the sales manager. So it's like whole web of the facility should be connected to these kind of topics. Yeah, so one of the last aspect is the case example. So I discussed a lot about different exposure factors or different potential risk factors within the facilities. So, and here would be the case example. Then all of these concerns are matter and how this could be represented during the audits or how it can be assessed during your own internal assessment or audit. So just imagine we have some kind of produce pack house. So during the peak season, so it's like now the middle of summer. In August, we will have the peak harvest season, especially in September, for example, for apples. So we can take the example of apple produce bag house, which is using third-party agency for labor. It's very common, for example, for plantations to make a service provision for agency labor to have employees on site for particularly seasonal activities. And here, some of the root causes can appear, some of the issues can appear. So from labor and human rights point of view, when we have such a agency labor on site, it can be excessive overtime or pay below the minimum. How you ensure that still the person is having the minimum wage, but there is a no fraudulent activity. These situations are still happening, even though it seems unrealistic, but it happens that agencies who are producing or sorry, who are providing the labor are uh, not supporting the labor itself, not supporting the human rights of these persons who are working for you as a site. And this kind of situation, if not controlled, it can affect both the agency and the pack house who made a contract if the labor on human rights are not secured and not made. Then we have health safety. So what would happen for temporary staff if there is no personal protective equipment or PPEs? So how it would be happen or how you would train these employees. This is also the common issue for the food safety if we're working with the agency of labor. Sometimes it appears that agency was made and contracted to do some work on house, but eventually no initial training, no induction training was made for these employees, and that is a huge issue then for the food safety. Then we have documentation and traceability. For example, who is controlling if that worker from agency is absent from site, or if some of the records of documentations would be stolen, because technically that employee is not yours. That employee is provided and sourced by the agency, of course, depending by the contracts and by different country rules. Then we have responsible sourcing process. So label provider also should map out and assess the potential risks. So we should understand from which countries, from which maps the labor is arriving at our facility. Do we have some aspects of culture? Do we have some food safety and quality management culture topics which we need to discuss? So this is also a topic in here. And then we have environmental management. So if we're having the peak packaging season, so many people working in the pack house, there's a huge amount of speed, let's say, for the process and a huge amount of produce, like apples, for example. So how the water is used, is it used resourcefully? Are there any monitoring activities how these agency provided labor employees are working? And then the governance point of view. So how these uh, employees given by the agency labor provider have channels to discuss the issues to the management. So it's a one point, then your own employee have a direct source, direct flow to you to explain that something is bad happening on the site. But how this chain would work, if it would work even, if the situation should be discussed by the agency labor provider, so by the person who is agent. So this is also important to tackle and to discuss how should be controlled. So, and that is the end of today's webinar. Once